Welcome to the Roundtable Consult. I am your host, Dr. Mark Williams, and I'm joined by my co-host, none other than Sergeant Sonia Madison. How you doing?
I was gonna say you are having a hard time making such
No,
an easy introduction.
no, I was just trying to figure out what's going on with the Janet Jackson cat.
Yeah, sometimes I'm adding a little style, adding little differences, flipping it up a little bit. I take it this isn't one of your faves, but
No, it looks not. It looks nice on you. It looks nice on you. I mean, the more of your face it covers, the better. And so,
the hate is real.
it's and early. It starts early.
I was gonna say, forgive him, mother, for he knows not what he does.
Ah.
This week it started off pretty good because I had a really good Sunday message from our pastor incorporating Jesus immigration status with perhaps how we should kind of view immigration policy. And then also Martin Luther King,
Well, I'm curious to hear what his perspective on that was.
oh, so he took it, he said he wanted to start by post Jesus' birth. And during that period, they were obviously in exile from their homeland. And so Joseph was traveling and trying to figure out a way to hide Jesus and his family, and he went to Egypt. And he also mentioned how he went there for the purposes of blending in. And so, the narrative that Jesus is white, the kind of conflicts with the idea that you can blend in an African continent or country in Africa. But again, he said how the Egyptians embraced him and how they, allowed him to come in. It wasn't as if they built up a wall, or it wasn't as they pushed him out. And so that was kind of how he was using some of the scriptures to tie in, or at least give food for thought as it relates to immigration reforms and policies here.
Interesting, nice. And so this Monday was Martin Luther King Day. Honestly, surprisingly, I didn't hear much about it this year. It didn't seem like they made that big of a deal about Martin Luther King Day today.
Well, I know here it was got so much snow, not here. I know you guys were getting so much snow around Monday that perhaps that was the distraction of it all. And I follow his daughter on social media, so I'm constantly getting pictures that she posted of the two of them. And I don't know if you remember Jonathan Majors talking about
Mhm.
I want
Yeah.
my white girlfriend to be Coretta Scott Speed. But there became a lot of backlash on that because, obviously from her perspective and for a lot of our perspective, she was her own woman. She wasn't there to be a prop for him, but she in her own right. And as we talked about during our family history weekend that we went to Alabama, she went to, or she was part of the Lincoln School that was essentially the first HBCU down in
Mhm.
Alabama. And so, she obviously had her own well before
Mhm.
marrying Martin Luther King. Our church, we had a day of service for at least the first 4 hours of the day with helping. We do a food pantry that we then serve, and among other things, I think we also do clothes drive and all that kind of stuff. So, but I'm in Atlanta, so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think I think we had a lot of people come down and go to Ebenezer and speak and do all that as
It'd be
it relates to that
interest.
Monday.
It'd be interesting to go to some of the deepest parts of Utah and Iowa and Montana and find out how they celebrate, or if they even celebrate Martin
Yeah,
Luther
or they
King.
commemorate the holiday.
And somehow I think it's probably to their advantage for the Republican Party now to not celebrate Martin Luther King Day. I think Ron DeSantis is probably, I don't know, did we even hear any of the candidates mention anything about
I
Martin
was
Luther
gonna
King
say I
Day?
was so distracted by this has never been a racist country that I don't know where you go after you put that out there.
Well, we couldn't let that slide. I get it.
Well, you can let it slide. I can't let that slide.
I can't let it slide. I can't let it slide. I know I have been on this show. I have been defending Nikki, little Nikki, little,
Call her by her real name, okay?
little Nikki. That's what Prince called her, but not her. But anyhow, we couldn't let little Nikki get by with that one, and I'm really disappointed that she continues to double down on those. And I get that you are having that you understand that your base is against DEI and anything that sounds like it could possibly or remotely give credence to DEI efforts and or to what do they call it before? It was what was the big word that they were using now before they
before
were
they use diversity.
yeah, or even when they were talking about teaching true history in school and they wanted to get that out of there. And gosh, it was a Republican buzzword that everybody was throwing around, and I can't remember what it was now. But anyway, it wasn't political correctness. It was actually teaching the truth of
You talking about like the
history.
critical race theory and
Thank
the
you. Thank you. I was having a brain fart on critical race theory. And so
they got to you. They got to you.
I know they've erased it from my mind. But the anything that can sound remotely supportive of that will automatically make you a non-candidate in their mind. And so I get that she's dancing the two-step around that, but I said last week that I thought she would make a good president. I just didn't like her policies. I might have to retract that statement because
You
because
might, so you still on the fence.
I might have to retract that statement. Other than that, she probably I think she will make a good president. But I think it's emblematic of her desire to not want to speak truth to those that have power to her. And I think a leader has to be in a position where they're willing to speak truth, regardless of the consequences of losing favors to some of their people. And so,
Well, and that to me is part of the problem I have with her is that if you feel as if by speaking truth that you are going to then, isolate people that you want to vote for you. It's kind of like the whole when John Trapper asked Donald Trump, do you want to support or do you want the support of David Duke or will you denounce the support of David Duke? And he stuttered, pushed back, tried to claim he didn't know who the guy was, and said everything but I do not want the support of white supremacists. And so to me, even though it may not be as blatant as that direct question, for her to continue to pander to that lets me know that no, that is the support you continue to seek. And that is problematic. That is why I say what she's doing is racist because you are promoting the oppression of a group of people by virtue of you desiring their support.
hmm. I really love when I saw that. I said, "Man, I'd love to be in that town hall and ask a question." Because if first of all, can a nation itself be racist? And a nation is inanimate. Basically, it's a system of governance. And when the laws, and when all of the financial, the economic, and the judicial systems and healthcare system, every system in the country is racist, whether there's a handful of people who aren't racist or not, does not negate the fact that all the systems and laws of that nation have a racist intent and racist backing for that matter. If we are a republic or democracy or a representative democracy, however you want to discuss it, since we've had that conversation the other day, um, if we are that and we elect representatives to represent our interests in Congress to make these laws, and those are the people who were elected, and those are the laws that they made, then guess what? It likely reflects the will of the people. At least back then it did. It was long before gerrymandering actually started happening. Now, today we can say that our representatives may not necessarily represent the will of the majority because we can see that, for the past, 6, 7 elections, Republicans have lost the majority vote in the country, but yet in several of them, they've won the presidency. So it's not necessarily truly representative of a nation. But back then, when we had Jim Crow laws and when we had redlining and when we had all type black codes and poll taxes, those things had racist origins. How can you look at those things? Mere fact that there exists HBCUs tells you that there was racism. The reason why is because the only place we could get an education was from our own institutions. We had to make our own institutions because you didn't want you didn't want black people to be educated in the same places or to the same degree as your almighty white people. This country was racist. You have to come to grips with that. And
I mean,
I'm
it's a
really
slap in the
disappointed by
face
that.
of commemorating Martin Luther King if you are if you can't even acknowledge that he was marching against the policies, the statutes, the regulations that intentionally were put in place in order to separate, oppress people of color. You
Mm.
mean either you acknowledge that we put him on a pedestal for that reason, or you just say, well, I mean, I guess he was about his own version of peace. And even in that is a level of confusion. But even going to her personally, to your point about HBCUs, her father could not teach but for an HBCU coming in and saying, hey, I will give you this job. Or
Mm.
I look at your merit and determine that you are qualified, and then therefore here is an opportunity for you. And so to me, not only are you slapping in the face of someone that we as a country are upholding, but you're slapping in the face of your own father, of your own family member. And putting aside the fact that you changed your name for the purpose of a simulation, putting aside the fact, that you have joined a party that again continues to progress by virtue of that fear, putting all that aside, like what part, I don't even know then what you stand for. What personally, I don't even know who you are.
Who are you? I'm Nikki Haley. Nikki.
Who are you
Little
here?
Nikki. Little
I mean,
Nikki.
it's baffling, and so that being part of the week then was heartbreaking, and then continuing to see her again push back on that because when she went to the town hall, Jake Tapper, obviously a guy who will make sure when it comes to that Republican Party, he's gonna ensure the hard questions are asked her, gave her another opportunity to say, hey, why don't you walk back what you said about this idea that we've never been a racist country? And instead of again saying, hey, I was wrong, like she said about the slavery, I was wrong. Yes, we have been a racist country. She goes on, listen, I've experienced racism. And get back to your point, you can experience racism and the country can still be held on the ideals that have nothing to do with racism. So these are two separate conversations. But instead of, again, correcting herself, she just wants to continue to push the narrative that, hey, we're all free. It is what it is now. Let's just go forth and be every man for itself. I'm just so disappointed.
So let's get to that because her defense is she's like, I just refuse to believe that when in the Constitution it says we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Well, you do realize that at the time that was written, black people weren't considered a man. We were chattel. So no, we were not held on the same level as white men. So they might as well said all white men were considered equal. And on top of that, women were not even included in that. And so, okay, then can you say that we were a sexist nation? If you even think that all men was relating to people of color as well, then are you going to say that we were not a sexist country at any point?
Well, and to be clear, that's part of the Declaration of Independence, which was
Or
drafted
declaration? Yes, sorry
by
about that.
Thomas Jefferson, who had numerous
Slaves
slaves,
and black
numerous slaves,
concubines.
and raped one of them, who now has a lineage of mixed race children. So when she kept saying, "Well, I just can't," I fathom that the intent of the founders was to be racist. Okay, well, let's just look at the founders. They all had slaves. I mean,
But does that make you racist, though?
so I don't know what mind or what again history that you're looking at, but let's stick to what is the history that we know.
So let me ask you this question because one thing, referring back to our reunion when we were in Alabama, one of the things that was most shocking to me was that my our aunts and uncles said they never really experienced racism because everything was segregated. And as long as you stayed in your place and they stayed in their place, you didn't really have, the negative effects of racism. So you weren't really the target of it necessarily. But they understood that they were still perceived by white people to be inferior. So that in and of itself would suggest that there was racism, but they never really had the problem or the burden of it as long as they could provide for themselves. Now, that's probably their unique experience, but we do understand that if we look at Black Wall Street, what happens when people did start actually thriving and making their own and succeeding in their segregated areas. Can you be segregated and still not be racist, though?
Well, if we're looking at the law, we know Brown versus Board of Education said separate is not equal, is inherently not equal, and that was the whole premise of dismantling Plessy versus Ferguson, which promoted the idea that separate could be equal. So legally, no. And I think we also know legally, again, through critical race theory, that we see that resources are not being distributed fairly. We see that opportunities are not, being distributed fairly. And again, we also saw that there were laws on the books that permitted lynchings, permitted the use of put force or whatever to ensure that white people maintained a certain level than black people. Even when we look at housing, the white people were able to get loans at a much higher rate, at a much lower level of qualification than black people, assuming that any black person could even get a loan, particularly for a house. So we know, again, through history, through critical race theory, if you want to talk about it or whatever, that separate but equal was discriminatory. Should never be a doubt in our mind in that realm. And I do want to say, even as it relates to our family, even though they said they didn't, to your point, experience the, I guess, blowback or the burdens of it, because they had parents that constantly reminded them that they're beautiful and constantly reminded them that they're loved. They were able to articulate experiences that were discriminatory. I mean, for example, they knew about the separate water fountains. They grew up in Alabama. My mom, when she integrated the school, but was able to see how it affected her father's ability to work, as they told him, as long as she goes to this school, you will not be able to earn your living. And so I don't want to put it out there that they didn't experience any
Oh,
racism. They did, but to your point, they were so clouded in love and so clouded in the affirmation that they are beautiful and that they can be whatever they desire to be, that the focus wasn't on the oppression by white people. And I know that there have been a lot of people that will argue that integration hurt us more than it helped us. I mean, we, we saw that a lot of the black businesses that were thriving then weren't able to maintain or stay in the same level, because we then, went out, we as our own community, then went out to some of the other businesses that we were denied access to. We see with the HBCUs. I mean, they were thriving when it was segregated, but we also see now there's only maybe a couple of them that get a lot more funding. I think recently Spelman got $100 million, but that's not something that some of the smaller HBCUs would necessarily receive, and they are still decreasing or don't have the level of resources and fundings as a lot of the predominantly white institutions. So to your point, I mean, to me, it's hard to answer the question. It's hard to answer the question, because there's still the idea that, hey, we're all a human race, as long as people in their perception want to have a caste system. And this is globally. I mean, you see caste systems in other countries, you see it in Asia, you see it, in Europe. It's not just here. But as long as humankind desires a caste system, I don't think that you could ever fully say, oh, I'm not experiencing an ism, whether that's
right.
race, sex, or whatever.
Yeah. The question wasn't was separate segregation racist, but the question is could you still be segregated and not be racist? I think there is a possibility for that. I think the probability of it is so no nil, because you said there's a tendency for us to really prefer this type of caste system. And the easiest way to help establish the boundaries of that is on the basis of race, the way that somebody looks. And when somebody looks like you, then they enjoy some of the same privileges that you do. When they don't look like you, they're not entitled to some of those same privileges. Which still brings us still to our question of the day, the topic of the day, and we've already started talking about it, and that complacency. When does complacency become complicity? We see over this past week that Nikki Haley was doing this whole dance around the issue of, was this a racist country? And it reminded me, I said, of the saying, those that forget their history are doomed to repeat it. Maybe that's part of the goal. Maybe maybe some of
Maybe.
these people erase
What's
all the
been rolled
history.
back so far? Maybe.
Yeah. You start listening to these people. They say, "Yeah, let's stop talking about the truth and let's forget about the truth of history, so that we can actually help rebuild it and say, hey, it wasn't so bad when black people were inferior to white people, and when that was the accepted norm. Let's go back to that. Now we got Tim Scott, who's thrown his hand into the endorsement game and is now endorsing Donald. How on earth could well?"
Well, you can't even say the last name. You
I
just said
couldn't.
Donald.
I just
Let it
couldn't.
trail off.
The Donald, the Donald and little Nicky now, and so both of it's just going from bad to worse. I think, unfortunately.
Which is interesting considering that both from South Carolina, both Nikki Haley to Tim Scott from South Carolina. From my understanding, one of the reasons why he was in the position as senator is because she, helped appoint him to that. And so I was like, not only are you endorsing and hey, and I will say, and a racist, not only are you endorsing a racist, but you're slapping the face of your fellow colleague. I don't know. Again, what's your end game, Tim Scott? What is your end game?
An appointment in the
But
cabinet.
going, what was it?
An appointment in the cabinet. That's what the end game
To
is.
continue to promote the racist policies. Okay, got you. You know.
No, it's just so that the next time he can run and he can have say, "Hey, listen, I was an ambassador to the UN as well." So, hey,
Well, I mean, going that her question that got her saying this is not never been a racist country was asking, "Hey, do you really think you could be the nominee, given your racial history, given your gender, and all this?" And so, to me, again, you're not being honest. We got to be honest. The fact that I'm sorry, Nikki, if you were a white male, you would be in a much better position in the Republican Party to be a nominee than what you're presenting today. If the fact that people that voted in the Iowa caucus said, I didn't vote for this person because he reminded me of 9/11, that speaks to your party. And so you got to be honest about that. And that goes on to Tim Scott. You got to be honest that I don't care what level you could be Kamala Harris's VP, your party is not going to vote for you to be the presidential nominee unless you proactively do some changes. And so, going to your question, as long as Tim Scott continues to play this complacency game, you are only hurting yourself and other people who, if you want them to come up in your party, to create the space for them to do so.
hmm. I don't know. Are policies that valuable? Are they
That valuable.
are they that
Keep
important to
slapping
you?
Martin Luther King in the face.
No, I'm saying, are policies that important to you that you're willing to compromise values? To me, the answer is no. If I have to compromise values in order to achieve policy, I don't care if it was Martin Luther King or anything else, and that was one of the things Martin Luther King stood for. He's like, there is a way to achieve these policies without compromising our behavior, with still being able to move in integrity, or at least what people could see integrity. But that's a whole different conversation about the other piece of it. He's a flawed man like all of us. So, but the point is, now when we start seeing men do wrong, and we enable that for whatever gain it might be, whether it's personal or whether it's policy gain, do we then become complicit in that? Because are we then a partaker in it? I heard it was. Um, I think it was Ice-T at the Rock and Roll Induction Hall of Fame. He said something that stuck with me. He said, in order to be remembered in this world, you have to either make something or break something. And I said, I kind of like that. You actually, and truth of the matter is, if you want to be remembered in this world, so yeah, you almost do have to do something extraordinary. But when you become complacent, and you have to be willing to shake up the ground, shake up the status quo, and truly make a difference. But unfortunately, there are many people who say, "Hey, if I fly under the radar, and just don't make any waves or anything like that, then it might eventually prove to my benefit, because I become in another position of power where maybe I can then effect some of the changes that I think would need to happen." So is he playing the long game? Is Tim Scott and others who ignore some of the social ills of these certain Republican um, nominees, those who ignore those, are they playing the long game to say we have to play this game until we get into the position where we can now make policies that truly do make a difference?
I mean, he to me, I don't know what his I don't know what his end game is. And if you're saying, well, we know that he wants to be president by virtue of the fact that he did put his hat in the ring, and so then maybe this is his path towards that. I'm still saying you're still on a never ending loop. The party that you're associated with, as well as the fact that it's clear, at least from my standpoint, you need minority people, particularly Black people, to win the vote. You need them. And you're not going to get not only, your Republican base or certain base of people that are rooted in white supremacy and therefore do not fathom the idea of a Black man being in that position, but you're also not going to get Black people supporting you. And so I I don't know how he sees this as his path, but I want to take it a step further in saying that not only do you come to a level of complicity, but also you hurt people. It is just as bad as the people that are actively hurting. And so I mean, it's to me, it's not even just, oh well, if I do nothing, then I'm not being racist. Yeah, but to me, you doing nothing is also contributing to the racism. Like, you're now hurting me. You now are oppressing me by choosing to do nothing when you have the ability and the capability to take a stand.
But don't you on both sides make the argument that, if the other person is elected, then people are going to be hurt? It's just a matter of choosing which people's hurt is tolerable for you, which one is sufferable. It's
Well,
because the
and
truth, I
it
mean,
may
because
be.
you got a lot of people who support Donald Trump who think that they support him just because they think that he's going to go out and stop all these child sex traffickers and everything else. And those are the people who, if Joe Biden continues in office, will be hurt and will be hurt the most. And so then you say, okay, well, that's why people are so, passionate sometimes about supporting Donald Trump. They may not like anything else that he's doing, but they have in their mind that he's the champion for getting out and tearing down all these child trafficking rings.
Well, first of all, I would first and foremost again emphasize, if you are in a position to make that change. Child sex trafficking laws are largely regulated by the states. So, because these are crimes, states determine the crimes within the borders and the confines of their state. So, even if you're looking at it from, oh, well, the Republican Party would help. Well, the Republican Party's idea is, hey, small government. Let the states figure out how they want to move, regulate, govern in their states, while we work on a national, foreign, we do the other stuff. So that argument to me fails off top, because it is on the states to then ensure that you are putting in laws to protect against child sex trafficking. And two, I was just at a conference that was talking a lot about child sex trafficking, and there is a federal law as well as a lot of states that do. We were specifically talking about Georgia because Georgia, with Atlanta airport being such a big hub and largely having a lot of child sex trafficking happening, our laws is a lot more stringent than, say, maybe what's going on in Utah. And yet, with Utah, Mormon church, whatever, you could probably make the argument that they probably need to tighten it up a little bit more than, as well. And so I would first implore people to make sure you understand, what is this person capable of doing by virtue of the position that they will be in, before you decide that, oh, because sex trafficking or whatever is such a hot topic, I want to make sure that I vote for the presidential, but not vote for the governor, or not vote for your local and city count representatives.
Well,
So
they'll
that.
do the same thing. They'll just run it straight down the ticket just because, they're okay, we're going to get him for president, him for the
But then
governor,
I
and
also go
him
to,
for.
okay, Matt Gates. I mean, he's been investigated and not been charged with anything. The federal government, didn't specifically
That's
charge.
all a
He's
witch
in your
hunt.
Republican Party.
That's all a witch hunt. All a witch hunt.
All right, but that to me then makes me wonder, okay, is this truly a concern of yours?
Well, I bring this up just because it is definitely a strong motivating factor for a lot of evangelical support for Donald Trump. You saw in Iowa, he's won even more the evangelical vote this time in the caucus than he did the first time. And I think in the first time he won like 30% of the evangelical vote. At the time of the primary, nobody really liked him. But this time he won 53% of the evangelical votes in Iowa, which means that's a substantial increase. And even last in 2016, when he started running, the evangelicals were largely opposed to him. But then when he became the nominee, threw their hats in right behind him. And now we start seeing that they still have continued their support for Donald Trump. And one of the key things about it, and I've heard this criticism a lot of times from my evangelical friends. They said, "How can you support somebody who will cause the unborn to suffer? How can you support somebody who think it's okay to let these?" And of course, you know, none of the nominees support or think that it's okay to have child sex trafficking. I don't believe that about any of them, but it's the narrative that is created within those circles so that, you know, when that's all the information that you're presented with, that's what you realize. And you say, well, if I do this, then I'm going to hurt this group of people. And so they can say, okay, well, like I said, you still got this decision to make. Which group of people are you going to hurt? Are you going to hurt the innocent, the unborn by electing Joe Biden, reelecting him, or are you going to hurt, you know, some already overly coddled group of minorities who,
At
you
Jeffrey
know,
Epstein.
who
He
who
was
has
associated with Jeffrey Epstein. So he was
right.
part of
The
that whole
truth,
ring.
the truth of the matter is that a lot of people don't look at black people as being sufferers in this country and people of color as suffering because they say, hey, listen, you got a whole lot more opportunity than I do. I've been turned down for jobs when you haven't. And so if I continue to support this DEI stuff, that just means it's a vote against another white man. And and I get that. And so they're in their minds are saying, no, I'm not hurting black people by voting for this person. But if you vote for Joe Biden, you are hurting the unborn and these defenseless children.
I was listening to and I forgot his name. I think Albert or the guy who was wrote a book a lot about evangelicals, and what
Tim
they're
Albert.
really thinking as it
Tim Albert.
relates, yeah, as it relates to
Mhm.
Donald Trump. Because again, we can talk about how Donald Trump has hurt women. I mean, he's been found guilty of sexual assault, and all we're talking about is the damage. He's been found guilty of defamation. All we're talking about is the damage. He's been found guilty of misleading investors. All we're talking about is the damage. He has an association with Jeffrey Epstein. That when Jaleel Maxwell came up, he said, "Well, I wish her well. I wish her the best." Excuse me, sex trafficking here. What are you wishing her well for? And so I agree with the sentiment of the author, who is essentially saying what evangelicals are saying is, hey, God used bad people for his purpose. And so they will acknowledge all the bad that is associated with Donald Trump, but will say, oh, but because his policy, or the policy that he is saying he will enforce, is good, then we will go with that. So it's again, history. If you ignore the history, you're going to be doomed to repeat it. You're ignoring everything he says because you believe that either through God or through some type of messenger, angels or whatever, that he is going to do what he says he does versus what he actually does. He's going to stand for what he's telling you versus what he's actually saying, even though oftentimes what he is saying is, hey, I'm going to make sure to punish people who did not align with me. He is saying that all top. And so to me, he's also made it clear, I will hurt those who do not support me.
But
But
they're
again,
okay
these
with that.
evangelicals are saying, well, I don't care about whatever he'll do on the side, as long as this policy as it relates to abortion, or as long as whatever policy we think is going to happen will happen. And I think that, again, hurts.
I think a lot of them want to see those people hurt. Those people who hurt children, there's a lot of people out there. who have no grace, no mercy for those. A lot of
When
evangelicals,
I say
you
hurt,
know,
hurt those that don't align with him. I'm not talking about
right,
hurting because again, he said when it came to Jaleel Maxwell, he said, "Well, I wish her well." He didn't say, "I hope she suffers."
right,
He said, "I
right.
wish her well."
But what I'm saying here is that the entire liberal bucket has been painted as those people who should be hated by not just the conservatives and not just Republicans, but also evangelicals. And they are adopting that mindset because they figure, hey, if you are complacent with allowing some of these things to go on, you're part of the problem. You are now complicit with it. And as a result, you need to be punished as well. How many wars have been fought across throughout the history of time in the name of religion, and saying that, hey, we can't stand for this type of immorality or this type of atrocities, and as a result we're going to launch war to literally annihilate your entire existence because we think you are evil people. And so when you can align that type of vitriol and give it a divine calling or divine mandate behind it, then yeah, those people are like, yeah, kill them all. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, these are people that I know. These are people who I consider to be friends, and they still they're now being radicalized into this ideology that says all liberals are evil and therefore must die. And so, no, that I mean, that's the extreme of it. But there are people who are now getting to that level of extremism, um, as we see with the threats that are going out now with the judges and electors and everything else. They're all being painted as a bucket of evil people, and you cannot allow these evil people to assume power because this is what they'll do. They'll kill your babies. They'll sell the ones that survived into sex slavery. And if you don't fight, you got to fight like hell or you'll lose your country. Is the message that they're hearing. And I get it. We look at it from our perspective and say that when you are complacent with seeing some of the racist dialogue and some of the racist rhetoric of Nikki Haley and Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, when you are complacent with that, then you become complicit with it. But the flip side to that, on their side, is also when you see Joe Biden, and his pictures with these little girls or something like that and sniffing some lady's hair, then you're complicit as well. Because there are pictures that are floating
Well, I mean, I
around.
can understand you saying that that's what they say, but I'm also trying to understand if you agree with that because again, we see pictures of Donald Trump not only with multiple people, we hear him saying, "Hey, just grab him by the pussy" and all this. We hear and see that. We also see pictures of him with Jeffrey Epstein, who I mean, years was going through a whole drug trafficking ring that didn't even start getting dismantled till about 2008. So we see that as well. And so then I guess I wanted to make sure from your opinion, because when you say, well, I get it, I'm like, well, what are you getting?
I
Because both of them
I
are
get
doing that.
I get the motivation. I get the motivation and only the motivation. Now, the motivation comes from information. Now, when your information is skewed and your information is incorrect, but you view it to be credible, then that's what you're moved off of. And the reality is that the information that we receive, we view it to be credible as well. And so therefore, information incites our motivation as well. And it's just human behavior. They're doing the exact same things that we would do. The only problem is that they have a different trusted information source than
Well, and
what
I
we
guess I'm
have.
still, I'm like, we need to then come to an agreement as to what makes something credible. Because again, like if we're all getting the same pictures, if we're all getting the same source of information, but that's why I agree with his point in saying, hey, they will acknowledge this is a bad person. This person has a history in which I've seen it, in which they acknowledge they have seen it, that this person not only goes through wives left, right, up and down, but also associated himself with a someone who is well known as a child sex trafficker, someone who has continuously, repeatedly discriminated against Black people in housing, someone who called for the death penalty of 5 people who were later determined to be not guilty. They will acknowledge all that and just but he stands for what they want. And so that's why I'm like, that's a different conversation than saying, oh, well, they don't see that. No, they see it. They just ignore it. And that is why I say it hurts.
No, they see it. They don't ignore it. They just see worse in Joe Biden. They just
But I'm
see
saying, show me the
worse.
worst, because
Uh,
to
you got
your
to tune
point,
in. You got to
then let
tune
me
into
see
their
the
news
worst, because
network.
I don't see Joe Biden standing hand in hand with Jeffrey Epstein.
You got to look into their networks, and you'll see Bill Clinton with them as
Well, I'm telling
well.
you to articulate it since you get it. That's
But
like you articulate the
I'm saying,
worst.
I'm saying, I don't necessarily support it. I understand. When I say I get it, I'm saying I understand. It doesn't necessarily mean that I concur with it and or endorse their positions. I think it's an ill-informed position that they have. They'll make the same arguments that Bill Clinton was actually more implicated than Donald Trump was when these most recent transcripts came out. They'll say that Donald Trump was completely exonerated from any wrongdoing in there, but Bill Clinton likes his women young, like his girls young. And so, but yeah, if you say you support Clinton, anytime when they present their arguments, they refer to Clinton, Obama, and Biden. They are all one, part of one cabal. And that's what they look at. They say there's a big sex trafficking, demon worship, child sacrificing cabal that actually consists of that's really led by Bill Gates, the Clinton Foundation, and the Obamas and Biden. They're all combined in that. And so if there's anything that implicates Bill Clinton, then it's automatically going to be attributed to Joe Biden as well. And that's how they justify those things. And then they'll say, well, we look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump is reformed. Donald Trump found the light of Jesus, and now he's a whole different person. I listen,
So Donald Trump can be reformed, but no one else can.
as foolish as it seems to you and me, the evidence of his reformation is his policy, not his behavior, and that's what they look at. The evidence of reformation is not the behaviors; it's the fruit that you
Well,
bear.
let's look at the policy. Let's look at that tax bill that he passed. Did that help the poor? I mean, let's look at some of this stuff there when everything was going when even like gun legislation that came down, and he saw these schools getting shot up. Let's look at then the policy. What did you do?
Okay, so if we
I
look at
mean,
if we
let's
look
look
at
at immigration. What did you do? And instead of saying, hey, we're going to make sure that people come here who are trying to seek asylum, blah, 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 you blocked any person of color into this country. Any person. Again, fine, let's look at the policy then. If you want to go there, then let's go there. I'm just saying, that's why I say I agree with the author. I'm saying, I think that, again, they see him as a representation, but they also see him as a bad person. And to me, it's a hypocrisy there because you can't lump in Biden, Trump, not Trump, Biden, Obama, and Clinton, but not also lump in Trump into that same category.
the
I
human
mean, I agree,
mind,
all of them are evil, but we're picking which one is the lesser, right?
the
Isn't that what
lesser.
we do?
That's exactly what it boils down to. And so it boils down to heaping unto ourselves teachers and prophets after our own lusts, after our own passions. And so what do you view as credible? You view as credible only the thing that really supports your paradigms and your ideologies. And so when anything else supports your ideology, you say, oh, this is good. Anything confronts that ideology, you say that's bad, inherently bad, and it must be stopped and destroyed. And that's where we're going. And any person who is complacent with that ideology that you view as being detrimental or evil must then be also complicit with that ideology, and they must be stopped at all costs. And it doesn't matter how evil the person is, or other people say, or how unpolished the person is in their rhetoric. If they're going to stop it, if they're going to put an end to it, then that's the guy that I'm getting behind. And unfortunately, that's the mentality that has been so heavily ingrained and indoctrinated into a lot of the people in the Republican Party and into a lot of evangelicals. They said we have to stop this, and I'm not even sure that that's a mandate, a scriptural mandate that we have as Christians. Are we supposed to be the ones getting out there to say, hey, we're going to go out and tear down evil nations? And I challenge anyone to show me in the scripture where God mandated that, or certainly where Jesus mandated it. Because in the Old Testament, yeah, there were times when the children of Israel they went into Canaan and they were supposed to utterly destroy the
Yeah.
Canaanites, and uh, and so I haven't done. And I said one of the things I want to do is a deeper study on what was the motivation behind wars that God ordained to go for His people to go into. Now I do know that He went and He told people to go destroy evil kings, but that was when they in order to free His people, which He allowed to get into bondage as a punishment to those people. And so at some point they would have to come out of bondage, and the way that they would come out would be to destroy the evil king. That's Old Testament. But then when you get into the New Testament, Jesus said we're no longer under an eye for an eye. And that the world, we're supposed to be in the world but not of the world, and that we're supposed to let the world have its system, and the world wouldn't become subject to the kingdoms of our God until Jesus Himself returned. And so I'm trying to figure out where's the mandate that Jesus gave us to go out and to destroy the world. And you hear the quote. It was like, I don't even know who said it, and I don't think anybody really knows who actually said it. But the only thing that's needed for evil to prevail is for good men to sit and do nothing. And that's true. But the question is it our mandate to end evil or eradicate evil in this world? Because I know that there's a lot of people who think that if we don't take an active stance and enact very carnal laws and policy to prevent evil, evil will prevail and we'll be complicit with it.
I will say, I mean, I'm not answering your question on as to whether there's a mandate to destroy the world, because I think, to your point, the New Testament makes clear that, particularly in Revelations, that God will, make for such destruction. But it does make clear that we are to be of righteous, or to have concern for the justice of the poor. We are to make sure that if you are oppressing the poor, then you are showing contempt for your maker. You are doing what is not in honor to God. And even James talks about, those who give to the poor lack nothing, but those who close their eyes to the poor will receive many curses. And so I do think God makes it very clear that you are to be of service and you are to help as it pertains to people who are less fortunate or marginalized, or are in a position of extreme vulnerability. And so by that, then I'm like, okay, if your ideology as an evangelical is to make sure justice for the poor, the more vulnerable, and that includes the unborn, if you want to lump that into that, to ensure that happens, then again, look at the person you are asking to lead the way and see if their light demonstrates that same ideology. And if it doesn't, then again, you are supporting someone who is going against everything that you stand for.
But if there's not a congruency between what you expect and what is, does that mean that what is not true? And the reason why I say that is that when I look at when Jesus was coming into Jerusalem, there were his many of his disciples and followers believed that Jesus was coming to overthrow the evil Roman Empire. And that was what they were expecting. When he came in and they were crying Hosanna, they were saying, "Oh, save," which really translates into mean, "Oh, save." And they were expecting him to topple the Roman government at that time because he had talked so much about the establishment of his kingdom. And they misunderstood the establishment of God's kingdom to be the establishment of a natural kingdom. When the reality was, Jesus was like, the establishment of God's kingdom is your submission to his theocratic rule, regardless of the environment that you're in. Even when you are oppressed by an evil king, when you are oppressed by other people, by systems around you that don't allow you to be able to exercise freely your right to worship. When you are oppressed by those, you can still be in the establishment of God's kingdom. And so it was a different paradigm that they had to overcome, and many of them left because they were like, "Oh well, he wasn't the ruler that I thought he was going to be." But it didn't negate the fact, because it didn't comport with what their expectation was, didn't negate the reality that he still was the king and that he still established God's kingdom. and so the even though and I hate to make this analogy here, but the reality is that sometimes we have an expectation that a certain person fits a certain bill, and they establish a certain dictum or whatever. Um, and when it doesn't come out the way that when it doesn't look the way that we expect it to look, we don't necessarily we can't necessarily negate its veracity or efficacy.
But we, and then again, going back to our underlying question about whether if we're choosing not to help, if we're hurting, you know, God made it clear, even in the Old Testament, that, hey, I don't want to have a ruler. I don't want you guys having a ruler because I know, one, it will be a distraction from your devotion to me. But also, you are going to put on a pedestal or an expectation on this person that that person cannot meet. I mean, and I think we have to all humble ourselves to accept that, hey, I will disappoint. I'm not perfect. And that's why grace, mercy, all that becomes so important, so that we are giving each other such forgiveness when we do fall short. And so going back again to this ideology, I don't then understand your ideology. You're putting this person on its pedestal that he will inevitably let down. But even if were thinking logically about, is this the right person to put on a pedestal? Well, then let's look at his life. Do you want your children to emulate the life that he is living? And if you don't want your children to go through multiple wives, if you don't want your children to be associated with sex traffickers, if you don't want your children to try to even dismantle what we stand for, because he's made it very clear, oh, all presidents should have immunity, period, no matter what. I don't care what the offense is. They should have a blanket immunity, and I should then be able to lead as a dictator. If you're did okay, then fine. I get your support for him. I get why you then say that he is your quote unquote Messiah. But if you are desiring someone that dismantles an entire nation in the name of God, then you have to make sure they're walking in the name of God. Otherwise, I don't know, I don't know how you trust that they're going to automatically have a light switch and be a different person just because that was your prayer and hope.
Yeah, their reference is Cyrus the king, and you know how he was an evil man, and God still used him to bring victory to his people. And so it's a loose. It's first of all, it's a very loose reference in the Bible. Very rarely, very little is Cyrus even referenced in the Bible, but you find that one thing that you hold on to, and you're like, yeah, so God can do it. Yeah, God can do a whole lot of things, but when you see that it's a one-off, and then you have to consider just how important was that thing if it's just a one-off. But what happens, what you see reiterated over and over again in the scripture is how you treat the widows, how you treat the poor, how you treat the foreigners, and that's reiterated hundreds of times throughout the scriptures. And you so focus on the one-off that you have, and that you ignore the hundreds of other things. Why? Because that's where your priorities are. That's the area that you're bent to to be passionate about. And that's part of the problem that we have with people is that when you get to your own silo and you're fed the information that supports your paradigm, and you're constantly fed it over and over again, and you're not open to hearing any alternative views about it, then you become radicalized. That's the way that you become radicalized, is that you feed yourself more and more of the things that you believe. And the reality is that we're set up as a country, and technology has helped us to get to that point where we become radicalized in our beliefs. And when we become radicalized in our beliefs, we start seeing complacency as complicity. I don't know that complacency always is complicity, um, because to say that it is would say that because Jesus didn't destroy the Roman kingdom, that Jesus supported it. But Jesus understood that there were higher priorities, and that our focus needed not be on the governance within this world, but the governance within the kingdom of God. And as long as we stayed kept that eternal focus and kept that spiritual focus, we didn't get entangled into civilian affairs. I think there's a scripture in First or Second Timothy that talks about a good soldier does not entangle himself with civilian matters, but rather he focuses on those things that the one who enlisted him views as priorities. So no, we shouldn't be so focused. I don't believe that we should be so focused as believers on what laws are written, because there's not a single law that can be or will be written in the United States that's going to bring about salvation
Well,
to
I do want
anybody.
to, I do want to challenge his idea that he was complicit, because I do think, even though he often said, give unto Caesar what Caesar, he still told his people, yeah, they may be taxing and taking advantage of the vulnerable, but you are not going to let that stand by giving your money, by giving your time and your resources, so that the poor are not suffering, even though that is the goal and attempt of the country. But to me, when I'm speaking, who the people I'm speaking to are not necessarily the extreme Republicans or even the Republican parties, because they will vote, they will take some action. I'm talking to the people that are choosing not to vote. I'm talking to the people that are choosing, to sit by and be like, you know what? Yeah, I hear that this conflict has happened, but I don't want to be associated. I don't want any part. I don't want to be anything to help dismantle whatever it is the government is doing. I'm making a plea to them and saying, hey, listen, if you're choosing not to take any civic action, you are hurting. You are also
I don't
leveling a place of complacency and complicity that hurts.
I can't
That's where
say
I'm.
that I can't say that I necessarily agree with that. The reason why is I'm gradually adopting the two different uh, viewpoints, paradigms from this. One is this world system, one is God's system. And if my focus is to be spiritually minded, what happens in this world system really doesn't impact it very much. It has very little impact. Yes, I'm exercising a civic duty, and I encourage every person to exercise a civic duty and going out to vote. And yes, it does make a difference in the natural. It does make a difference about what laws the city, your country and state operates under. Yeah, that makes a difference. You have the opportunity to do that in America. Go out, exercise that liberty that you have. You absolutely should do that. But in the grand scheme of eternity, does it matter? No, not a bit, because there's not a single law that you can write that will change the outcome of what God has already predicted would occur. And so there's not a single law that you're going to write that's going to stop the end of the world. There's not a single law that you write that's going to stop tribulation, that's going to end evil, because evil will continue to increase. And yes, and so it's, to me, I think sometimes from a spiritual standpoint, our voting is an act of futility. From a civil standpoint, it's an act of honor and deference to the country and the laws that we have. But I think the higher priority needs to be a spiritual.
Well, I think and I know we're out of time, and so I want to definitely make sure we didn't give it to our viewers. But I also think that even from a spiritual standpoint, we should vote. I mean, because to me, I'm even looking at Jesus died on the cross because the government, the other people said he committed blasphemy. That is how we, use government to put him on a cross, and he subsequently died. And so to say that our participation in government has no effect on our spirituality, I just don't agree with that. And I also feel like if God is calling you to help the poor, he's calling you to do X, Y, and Z, and he's giving you the knowledge, whether it's through your understanding of the laws or whether it's through your understanding of politics, then to me, for you to ignore the blessing that he's given you for the purpose of taking action in service of his people, that to me is a spiritual consequence.
Are you telling me that God, you can't do every mandate that God has given us without the laws?
I'm saying if you have the knowledge, if he blessed you with that and you choose to ignore it because in your mind, well, if I'm participating in government, that isn't going to affect my spirituality. Well, God is giving you this platform, he's giving you this information so that you can use it in service to his people. The government, from my understanding, is about making sure the most vulnerable are protected. And so if you aren't using that particularly if you have the skills and the know-how to do it, if you aren't using that in service to his people, I think that's a spiritual
But
consequence.
doesn't the scripture tell us that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but they're mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds? And so you're then elevating then a carnal weapon above the efficacy and the potency of a spiritual weapon. And it's not. The way that we effect every command that God has given us is not at the ballot box, it's not in legislative hallways. Where it's done in our prayer closets, it's done on our knees, it's done in our witness. Those are the mandates that God has given us. And yes, we do have the liberty in this country to be able to exercise some of those civil rights. We should exercise those. But let's not conflate them with what our spiritual responsibilities are, because our spiritual responsibilities are clear. And the way that we're supposed to effect those things is also clear in the Bible.
Like I said, I'll leave it to the viewers. I know we're out of time because there James also speaks to how we are to use man's authority and in the respect of that standpoint. But again, we're out of time, and I can't quote it off top, so I'll leave. I'll bring it for the next one. But you guys, as viewers, let us know what you think. Do you feel as if you aren't helping, you are hurting, or do you feel as if again you can have a level of complacency that doesn't quite reach the point of either complicity or of hurt? We are here every Saturday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time. You can also catch us on your favorite podcast platform. We have so many episodes that we would love to hear you guys' opinion on. You can catch a repeat of this episode on Star Radio, and you can also catch us on YouTube. Definitely bring up some of our viewerships on the YouTube channel. So until next Saturday, thank you guys so much for tuning in.